Ever stare at something that you see every day and wonder, does that even have a name? What is that thing? Like the dot on an eye, or that weird space between your thumb and your index finger. Well, it does have a name, but you probably didn't know it. You know that little plastic tip on the end of the shoelace? That has a name too. Turns out, a whole bunch of everyday objects that you thought were just things actually have real, official, and sometimes ridiculously fancy names.
Someone somewhere came up with a word for everything.
I didn't make these words up. They're real. They've got histories, but they're hiding in plain sight. What was that?
What is that thing?
Let's get wise to the words. That tiny plastic or metal tip on the end of your shoelace? That's called an aglet, and it keeps your shoelace from fraying. It actually dates back to Roman times. It comes from the Latin acus, which means a needle. It's actually where we get the word acupuncture, acus, the aglet.
Stick a needle in your...
How about that little groove between your upper lip and your nose? It's called the philtrum. Philtrum comes from the Greek philtron, meaning love charm or attraction. Ancient cultures thought it had a spiritual or mystical meaning, like the mark left by the angel, silencing your secrets.
Shh.
Just go. In reality, it's just a byproduct of how your face forms in the womb. Philo is Greek. That means love. And it gives us philosophy, the love of wisdom. And also Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. The philtrum. Don't touch my philtrum! What about those random symbols that used to represent swear words in comics? They have a name. It's called Grawlix. Cartoonist Mort Walker coined that term in the 1960s to describe comic book swearing without actually swearing.
And a diaper. You can't say but. That's a bad word. Well, I didn't say real but.
It's a clean way of letting characters lose their temper without breaking any rules. And what about those little dots above an I or a J? Well, they have a name. It's called tittle. It's from the Latin and it simply means a small mark. In fact, there's a phrase, jot or tittle, and that comes from the Bible, from the Gospel of Matthew, when Jesus said, "For amen I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall not pass of the law, till all be fulfilled." By the way, a jot is the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the yod. It's basically a tiny comma-shaped character. The word jot comes from the Greek word iota. It's the smallest letter of the Greek alphabet, and that's where we get the phrase, not one iota, meaning not even the tiniest amount. And you know that dimple or indentation on the bottom of a wine bottle? That has a name too. It's called a punt, and apparently it adds structural integrity to the bottle. Maybe even help the sediment settle. Punt. You know when you order a hot cup of coffee and you ask for that cardboard sleeve on the outside? That has a name. It's called the zarf. It comes from the ornate metal holders once used in the Middle East to protect hands from the piping hot cups of coffee. Originally, zarfs were made of brass or silver, often decorated with intricate designs. Now, the modern version might not be as fancy, but it gets the job done. Oh, I feel like I'm gonna zarf.
Tim Hortons, may I take your order?
Sure, I'll take a large cup of coffee, 2 sleeves and no cup. What the? You know that smooth skin between your eyebrows? That's called the glabella. It's that area where you furrow when you're concentrated or confused.
This bit, called the Glabella.
The word comes from the Latin gabellus, which means hairless, because that area typically, doesn't have any hair, unless you have a unibrow. There can only be one. You know that pale half moon on the base of your fingernail? That has a name as well. It's called the lunule. It's part of the nail matrix, the tissue that produces new nail cells, helping your nails grow. The word lunule comes from the Latin luna, which means moon, because of its crescent shape. Lunule, luna, the moon. Lunatic.
I'm ready to go in, Coach. Just give me a chance. I know there's a lot riding on it, but it's all psychological.
You know those horizontal lines on the inside of your wrist? Those are called rascettes. Palm readers think they reveal your fate, but science says otherwise. Rascettes, wrinkly wrists. Before we go on, don't forget to hit the underwriting button. I mean, the subscribe button. Subscribe comes from the Latin Sub-Scribere, which means to underwrite, basically to support. So if you're learning anything, just hit the subscribe button. And don't forget the Aglet button. That's Pig Latin for like. You know that perfect little blob of toothpaste that you squeeze onto your toothbrush? That has a name too. It's called a Nurdle. The word's origin is unclear, but it's been used in the dental world and marketing for decades. I feel like a Nurdle. You know that metal band holding the eraser on the end of your pencil? That has a name as well. It's called a Ferrule. It keeps the eraser snug on the pencil, but it also keeps the pencil from splitting. The word comes from the Latin viriola, meaning small bracelet, which makes sense because it's basically jewelry for your pencil. Ferrules also show up on paintbrushes, walking sticks, and even umbrella tips. Ferrule. You know those little sparkles or swirling patterns you see when you rub your eyes? Those have a name too. They're called Phosphenes. They're visual sensation caused by pressure exerted on the retina. They're not caused by light, although they look like it.
Do I hear someone's stomach growling?
You know that gurgling, rumbling sound your stomach makes when you're hungry or digesting food? That's called a wamble. It's an Old English word that sounds just as weird as your stomach feels when it makes it. Although it's fallen out of everyday use, it once described everything from belly aches to nausea. Kind of a perfect onomatopoeia for that inner struggle. You know the armhole in a shirt or a jacket where your sleeve is attached? That's called an armscye. It's an important part of tailoring. If it's too tight or too loose, you feel it all day. It has to be just right. The word comes from old sewing jargon and may have evolved from Armscye, like the daisy. Day's eye. You ever threw something, or hopefully not someone, out the window? That has a name as well. Defenestration. It comes from the Latin de, meaning down from, and fenestra, meaning window. Down from the window. You know that earthy, refreshing smell after a rain? Well, that's called Petrichor. The term was coined in the 1960s by 2 Australian researchers and comes from the 2 Greek words, petra, meaning stone or rock, and ichor, the fluid that flows in the veins of the gods. It's the scent of the plant oils and soil compounds being released into the air, and it's scientifically proven to make us feel relaxed and nostalgic. I love that smell.
Whoa! Someone smells stinky! Oh, it's me.
You know that wire cage that's on top of the cork in a wine bottle or champagne bottle? That's an Agraffe. It comes from the French word for clasp or hook. It keeps the pressure from popping the cork prematurely. Agraffe. No relation to giraffe. You know that small flap of cartilage right in front of your ear canal? That's called a tragus. It helps muffle sounds coming from behind you, and it's a surprisingly popular place for piercing. Ouch. You know that web space between your thumb and your index finger? That's called a Purlicue. Rhymed with curlicue. I guess it's where you rest those chopsticks or grip a tool, where I get pinched all the time. Stupid pliers. Hurts. Now this one you may not see as often these days. I used to see it back in the day. With that backward P symbol used to mark paragraphs in editing. That's called a Pilcrow. It dates back to medieval scribes who needed a way to break up long blocks of handwritten text. The Pilcrow. You know that crisp swooshy sound that silk makes when you move it around?
Did you hear something?
Yeah, like a swoosh.
Yeah.
It must be the fabric. It's rubbing between your thighs when you walk. That's what's making that swooshy sound.
That sound has a name. It's called Scroop. It comes from a special treatment that gives that silk its signature rustle, luxury that you can hear. Scroop. You know this division symbol that everyone has used? It actually has a proper name. I didn't know this, but it's called an Obelus. It was originally used by ancient scribes to mark questionable passages. The word comes from obelos, Greek, meaning a pointed stick, the same root as an obelisk. The obelus. And that sideways figure 8 symbol that we all use for infinity? Well, that's called a lemniscate. The name comes from the Latin lemniscus, meaning ribbon. And that's a fitting shape for something that never ends. It goes on and on and on.
To infinity and beyond!
Now what if you don't want to say a niece or a nephew every time? What if you didn't want to specify it was one or the other? Then you would use Nibling. It's like the word cousin. It's a handy, generic, actually gender-neutral term, coined in the 1950s, that never quite made it to everyday speech. It probably should have. Those little nibblings nibbling on nibs. And now, Wize